first met Jerry Faulkner in the late 1970s. I was in charge of the youth baseball program at Sumter, South Carolina at the time, and Jerry was working as an umpire in the program. He was by far the best umpire we had. At the time, I had no idea that I would eventually work for him at Wilson Hall, where he was the head basketball coach. In those days, I thought I was primarily a basketball coach, with football as a secondary coaching position. It would take me just a few more years to figure out that I was a football coach. About 1979, Jerry needed an assistant basketball coach and head JV coach. The school also needed an assistant football coach who had also coached JV football. And I also agreed to be the boys' track coach. Yeah, that was a pretty heavy load, but not that unusual for that period of time. In fact, in the next few years, I'd take on even heavier loads. Varsity football, varsity basketball, baseball, and athletic director. And also girls basketball at one step, in addition to all of those. Now, I'm telling you about Jerry because I want to emphasize how much you can learn from someone who coaches a sport other than football. In fact, pretty much no matter what sport you coach, there are things to learn from coaches in other sports. Too many young coaches miss out on the opportunity to learn from people outside their field. Jerry was a no-nonsense coach, and his teams were very disciplined. If he said practice started at 4 p.m. and you arrived at 4 p.m., you were late. He would say, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. And if you're late, don't bother to come. Another of his favorite sayings was never a wasted minute, never a dull moment. His practices, and his classroom for that matter, reflected just that. I heard him say once that they should put newspapers on the walls of the urinals. There's time wasted here. His practices were my first exposure to really organized practices that were scripted out in advance with exactly what would be done and how long it would take. I don't mean individual for 10 minutes, team for 20 minutes. No. I mean, in some cases, they're broken down into 2 or 3 minute segments. You didn't just go shoot free throws for a while. There were other skills attached. You didn't stand around while someone else shot. That's wasted time. He'd have small groups in stations working on passing under pressure, big man drills, Micah drill, for example, free throws, rebound drills, dribble drill, and they rotate every couple of minutes. Everything was organized and everything was fast-paced. Never a wasted minute, never a dull moment. We won a ton of basketball games and a state championship, one of many in Jerry's long career. I got to coach a lot of really good kids and one high school superstar, the late Clark Bynum. Clark was one of the top prospects in the country, recruited by all the big programs in the country. And it was exciting to me as a young coach to see some of the ins and outs of big-time recruiting. We played a lot of man-to-man, and one of my primary jobs was making the initial matchup assignments during warm-ups. We used film back then, and we rarely got an opportunity to see our opponents play in person. So I had to go by box scores who had been scoring for the opponents in past games and what I saw during pregame warm-ups. I always started the matchups with who Clark would defend. Jerry did not want Clark, who was 6'8", handle the ball, and could shoot from outside, to get into foul trouble. So Clark did not guard the other team's big man. He also didn't guard their shooters. My job was to find a guy who wasn't much of a threat and to assign Clark to him. Then I would figure out the other matchups. Now, games on the line, fouls not an issue. We'd move Clark to guarding someone who could score. But until that point, we just kind of let him hang out pretty close to the basket. We had a reunion of the state championship team a few months ago, and I got to see a lot of players I had not seen in over 40 years. It was great. I had one former player, a football player and a track runner, not a basketball player, who was there. And he came up and he told me what a huge difference I had made in his life. He told me the story of his running track and me encouraging him to run the 400 meters because I believed he would be good at it, even if he was reluctant to do so. He did do well in it, and he qualified for the state track meet. He told me that gave him the confidence to do so many other things in his life. He also reminded me of that trip to the state championship meet down in Charleston, a couple hours away, and how I drove him to the meet and then took him to where his parents were staying on vacation afterwards, and how much that meant that a coach would do that for a player. I had never thought about it, not then or ever since. Not about encouraging him to try something I thought he would excel at, and certainly not about taking him to the meet and then to where his parents were. My point here is not to make myself look good. It's to point out that the everyday things that coaches do for players, whether we think they're anything more than routine, often have lasting impacts on kids. Jerry left there the same year I did, and he became an assistant basketball coach at Clemson. I got to work a lot of basketball camps there because of Jerry. Later, he spent many years as the head coach at Charlotte Latin in Charlotte, North Carolina, winning numerous championships there. At last count, Jerry won about 839 games while losing only 279. That's over 70% wins across 5 decades. He coached in the McDonald's All-Star game, and he coached the USA versus Russia high school game. I learned so much about organization and preparedness, not just in terms of practice and games, but in how to be a head coach, things that stuck with me throughout my career. One of the biggest things I learned from Jerry was a part of his coaching philosophy. He said, I don't coach basketball. I coach people. My coaching both JV football and basketball teams at Wilson Hall resulted in my first head coaching job. People at another school noticed, especially when my JV teams beat their JV teams for 2 years, teams that they thought were among the best young teams they had ever had. They called and inquired, and the next thing I knew, I had my first head coaching job. I was 29. Despite all the things I'd learned from Jerry and all the things I'd learned from Coley White and Sumter before that, I was far from ready for that position. I was kind of full of myself. And one of my problems was that I didn't realize how little I knew and how unprepared I was. Coaching JV isn't coaching varsity. Being an assistant isn't the same as being the person who has to do all the organization, all the planning, and most importantly, make all of the decisions. I wasn't mature enough nor knowledgeable enough, particularly knowledgeable on the football side. I'd been attending basketball clinics every year, not football. What I knew about offense and defense was limited to what the couple of staffs I had been on had run, and they were similar. It's important to know what you know, but it's also important to know what it is you don't know. You have to know your strengths and your weaknesses, and you need to fix those weaknesses as best as you can. And it's important that you learn from as many good people like Jerry Faulkner that you can possibly learn from. I apologize for missing last week and being a little late with this week's episode, but I had a little injury that prevented me from being able to sit up and do a podcast. But I'm back at it now, and hopefully I won't miss any more weeks. See you next week.